Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would strike Section 2 of the bill. 2 weeks ago, well, actually less than 2 weeks ago, the subcommittee received testimony regarding this bill. This section raised a significant amount of concern from the witnesses at that hearing. Every witness said that it would be potentially counterproductive to prioritize weather research over climate or oceans research, as this section does. Mr. Chairman and committee members, we all care about public safety, but those expert witnesses were very clear that the most significant research challenges in understanding weather processes and improving forecasting ability lie beyond the arbitrary boundary used to separate weather from climate, which is just 14 days. They also noted that ocean-atmosphere interface questions are significant for weather forecasting. Nowhere is this more true than as it relates to tropical storms. If what you want is to have a more powerful seasonal forecast about the severity of hurricanes, for example, or if you want to understand the generation and behavior of these storms, you have to study oceans and climate. I want to add that Dr. Drogemeyer, who was here and testified from Oklahoma, said this: "My final comment concerns climate and weather in a mutually reinforcing context. All of us recognize the importance of balance between weather and climate investments in our nation's research and operations portfolio, yet the traditional line dividing weather and climate is increasingly blurred as climate models are now run at resolutions approaching those of weather models. Consequently, we will do well to consider weather and climate not as two distinct elements at the extreme ends of a spectrum, but rather as inseparable parts of the Earth's system." Mr. Chairman, because this language, I believe, is counterproductive to improving weather forecasting, and anticipating that we will be able to work out some language that would be a better reflection of the expert testimony we received, my amendment would strike this section. I also want to point out, Mr. Chairman, that it's been mentioned this morning that Dr. Drogemeyer talked about the goal of 0 deaths. But that, Mr. Chairman, is not in the bill. So we need to have further conversations about how we can improve weather forecasting without limiting the work of NOAA and its relevant line offices, which I also want to add are not defined in this section. Mr. Chairman, although I have serious concerns about this section of the bill and offered this amendment, as I explained, we've received pretty clear testimony that this section is problematic and could be counterproductive to the goal of improving weather forecasting. However, given your commitment, Mr. Chairman, to work with us as we move forward, I'll withdraw this amendment and look forward to having further conversations about addressing this issue as we work to improve this bill, hopefully before the full committee markup. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back. This amendment strikes the requirement that the Assistant Administrator for OIR is required to run Observing System Simulation Experiments, or so-called OSSIs. The subcommittee learned in our June 26th hearing that OSSIs are not the only analytical tool available to evaluate potential configurations of observing systems on weather forecasting, and we talked about that again this morning. According to that expert testimony, other tools have been developed that are quicker, less expensive, and potentially more robust. I expect that if we modified the language of this section to simply require the use of the more appropriate, most appropriate and effective analytical tool, which in some cases would be an OSSI, in some cases not, we would have broad bipartisan support. I hope we can get there before we mark up at full committee, and barring that, I ask that we strike the section as it now stands, particularly because of the provisions that were added in the amendment you offered, Mr. Chairman. And I hope we can work with knowledgeable members of the weather enterprise to craft a responsible language. Additionally, as I noted, the manager's amendment now appears to create an earmark for the benefit of 1 or 2 companies, and I don't know what this will cost the taxpayer, but it's unclear why we should do this or what we hope to learn. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not disagreeing that OSSIs can be a valuable tool, as we heard in the testimony. But as explained, the amendment would strike the provision, and I hope that we can continue to work to make this a better section, even in light of the manager's amendment. We've heard pretty clear testimony that the section is problematic, but given the Chairman's commitment to work with me as we move forward, I'll withdraw this amendment and hope we can discuss this issue further and work out bipartisan language regarding the use of OSSIs before this bill moves forward for a markup at the full committee. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we heard in the testimony, severe weather events that can result in the loss of life and property have become all too frequent in recent years. We've seen it across the country, and we know the consequences can be devastating. That's why we're here today. The willingness and ability to improve weather forecasting at NOAA is something that this bill intends to do. But as I said in the June 26th hearing on the bill, if we want to improve weather forecasting, we should focus on the actual weather forecasters' needs at the National Weather Service. The witnesses who testified before the subcommittee at the June 26th hearing agree. The current authorizing language focuses only on funding at the OAR, the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, which is contrary to the stated intention of this legislation. If improving weather forecasting is the goal, then the bill should not fund OAR's weather effort over the work of the National Weather Service. This could prove to be both problematic within NOAA and, importantly, counterproductive. Therefore, I offer this amendment that removes the language in the bill that authorizes OAR only. It's a common-sense amendment, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. As I explained earlier, I have serious concerns about this section of the bill, which is why I've offered this amendment and explained why it's problematic and counterproductive to the goal of improving weather forecasting. But given the Chairman's commitment to work with me as we move forward, I'm going to withdraw this amendment and look forward to addressing this issue as we work to improve the bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I explained in the prior amendment, putting all of the emphasis on OAR is not consistent with our intention to improve weather forecasting at NOAA. We heard testimony from NOAA and experts in the weather community at the June 26 hearing, cautioning this committee about the detrimental consequences if weather research programs are emphasized over other research programs, or if research is emphasized over weather forecasting. Resources for research are already under constraints across all Federal agencies, especially with the cuts already in place and slated to be implemented for the sequestration. This bill in its current form makes things worse and actually jeopardizes research at NOAA that could improve weather forecasting. NOAA needs a solid research portfolio and a solid weather forecasting portfolio. Weakening one to strengthen the other could have serious negative consequences for NOAA's ability to provide accurate, timely weather forecasting, and the witnesses at the June 26 hearing all seem to agree. A strategy that emphasizes progress in all areas of NOAA's research enterprise can only be accomplished if the OAR has the resources it needs. In order for OAR to accomplish NOAA's weather forecasting objectives, I propose this amendment that would strike through the current section that authorizes only certain programs and replace it with language that authorizes funding for all programs and research within OAR. The funding levels proposed in my amendments are FY 2012 spending levels with 3% for inflation added for each year over the next 5 years. This replacement language will make NOAA whole again and relieve the agency from the negative impacts of sequestration. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. We've received pretty clear testimony that this section could be problematic and counterproductive to the goal of improving weather forecasting. However, as with the other amendments, given the Chairman's commitment to work with me as we move forward, I'll withdraw this amendment. I look forward to addressing this issue as we work to improve the bill. And, Mr. Chairman, I just want to add, with this amendment, as with others, I hope and trust that we can have these conversations before we move to a full committee markup. I am here, as you are, to improve weather forecasting, and as was discussed earlier in this subcommittee markup, there's a lot of room for bipartisan cooperation here, and having a bipartisan bill significantly increases our chances of having legislation that can be signed into law and will actually improve weather forecasting. So I'm withdrawing this amendment as well as the others with the understanding that we are going to continue to work together with the goal of improving weather forecasting in a bipartisan bill that I hope all members will be able to support.
Will the gentlelady yield before the gentlelady finishes?
Yes, I'll yield, Mr. Grayson.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask the majority where these numbers came from. This is just for my own edification, and I understand that the amendment's being withdrawn, so it will become moot. But I just want to know where the numbers 80 million and 20 million and 20 million came from. Maybe you can explain that to me. I'll yield to anybody who can do that. You want to get back?
I'd like to get back to you on that.
Yeah. All right. I yield back.